Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today at the TIESS Summit. We are so happy that all of you are here to join us to listen to our esteemed panelists discuss the question, how and why might we encourage greater learning through play? We're going to hear from three panelists today, Mr. Ollie Bray, who is the Global Director Connecting Play and Education at the LEGO Foundation in Denmark, Professor Dr. Geir Graus, who is the Global Director of Kidzania in the United Kingdom, and Dr. Swaroop Rawal, who is COO of NEM Life Skills in India. So what we will do in this session is we will have 10 minutes for each of the panelists to present and give their opinion and experiences on this particular topic. And then we will get to have a discussion where we hopefully will get to address some of your questions and hear our panelists' responses. So during the presentations, for those of you listening, it would be great if you could put your questions into the conferencing chat, and we will be able to receive those and ask them of our panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Ollie Bray.
Well, thanks so much, and thank you everybody for tuning in to this session this morning. I think it's fairly well established now that for most education systems that have got developed early years and childhood education programs, then play is an established pedagogy in these areas. But what I want to do during this short presentation is make a case that actually there's a space for play-based education all the way through the formal school system. And the reason that I think a lot about that is that, as I've already said, there's a lot of emerging evidence that play-based pedagogies can have a real impact for young children. But if we also look at successful businesses in the world, we also know that these businesses are highly playful in nature. And to me, something that I've been thinking about a lot during the last 2 years is, why do we withdraw this playfulness for children as they seem to progress through primary school, into middle school, and then go to high school? I think there's different reasons for that. But as I say, during this short talk, I want to make a case, for play across the whole of the spectrum, or the play journey, as I call it. In order to do that, I want to kind of set the scene for around what I believe good play-based education is. And in the LEGO Foundation, we have a view on that. And we have a set of 5 characteristics where our research and evidence suggests that if these 5 characteristics are present, then we get good play-based education. And these 5 things are that we think good learning through play happens when the experiences are actively engaging, meaningful, iterative in nature, socially interactive, and joyful. And by actively engaging, I don't just mean that children are physically engaged in the activity. I'm talking really about mental immersion and that ability to stay focused. For those of you that have got young children or have interacted with young children, think about a child when they're engaged in play, perhaps using some Lego blocks or a jigsaw puzzle or outside, and you call and you try and distract them, but they're completely immersed, in that experience. They're completely actively engaged. And imagine if we can create learning experiences like that in the classroom. By meaningful, what I mean is experiences that children can relate to. And I think the most powerful learning through play experiences happen when a child takes something that they know and they use this as the foundations to build on that knowledge, to turn it into something else and to really stretch, both their cognitive and their social abilities. Iterative in nature, both in terms of the activity, but also in terms of these constructive and constructionist learning approaches. Socially interactive, where appropriate, young people learning from their peers, young people helping other younger children. Of course, the power of intergenerational learning is incredibly important and so powerful in terms of learning through play, particularly if we want to develop creativity skills. And then this notion of joy. And I'm very, very careful when I use that word joy, because I don't necessarily think learning through play has to be fun. I like to use the analogy of running and the analogy of if you go and run a marathon, if you do that, that's certainly not a fun experience. By the second hour in, all that you want to do is give up. But there's something quite wonderful about that feeling that you get at the end when you've succeeded. And you get that through learning through play, and you also get that through these quality learning experiences. So I think if we think about these 5 characteristics, actively engaging, meaningful, iterative, socially interactive, and joyful, we can also use these as principles for what good and excellent lessons could look like in the early years, in primary, in secondary school, at college level, at university education, all the way through. And these 5 characteristics, are incredibly important. And one of the other pieces of work that we did at the LEGO Foundation is we went out and we did a literature review of existing evidence-based practice and different pedagogies, and we tried to cross-map these pedagogies to the 5 characteristics of learning through play. And this probably won't surprise you, but there were a number of pedagogies that were seen to be quite strong in these 5 characteristics. And these pedagogies were cooperative and collaborative-based learning, experimental learning, guided discovery learning, inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, and project-based learning around that. And my argument here, of course, is that if we really want to sort of try and get more learning through play, particularly into the older years of school, then it may be appropriate to use some of these techniques some of the time in order for young people to experience these 5 characteristics and experience the joy of learning. The other kind of point that I wanted to sort of make is that when I think about learning through play, I think about it on a spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, I've got really, quite directed activities. They still might be playful in nature, but we're really just telling the children what to do in order to get that joyful experience. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got maybe what I call free play. So you provide some objects or some artifacts, or just let children kind of do what they want in a safe space, to explore and to create and to wonder. And the interesting thing about this is that our research in the LEGO Foundation says that actually there's some learning that happens some of the time if it's directive, and there's some learning that happens at the other end of the spectrum when we've got free play in there, particularly around social and emotional skills. But some of the most powerful learning happens somewhere in the middle, where we've got this guided play, where we've got some kind of interaction again from a peer. And if that peer is an adult or someone that brings wisdom to the kind of play experience, then we can really use this to create these powerful learning opportunities. And again, if we think back to some of those pedagogies that I was mentioning earlier, collaborative learning, cooperative learning, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, then of course, these aren't things that children do independently by themselves. Normally, there's an adult or an expert that's involved to really try and extract the learning experience from that. The other point that I want to make is that it's been proven now, and again, there's an emerging evidence-based, that learning through play is actually really good at developing a set of holistic skills. Skills, and again, creativity is something which is often associated, with learning through play, with learning through play as well. So what this means is that if we can use some of these playful pedagogies, as I call them, not only going to develop some of these skills that we think are really, really important in young people, but we're also at the same time going to be able to develop learning outcomes that are appropriate for the system. So in very, very brief summary, an answer to the question, how might we encourage more play and practice? I think this really comes down to 3 things. So first of all, we need to really help people understand what play is. It's not just for young children. Play is actually a very, very complex thing, and we need to be able to create a common language, across the world about what makes good play-based experiences. And then what we need to do is we need to help practitioners and policymakers and parents understand, what does good play look like? And when I talk about good play, I mean good play at each of the levels on that spectrum, including guided play, where young people are co-creating with adults that bring wisdom to the scenario. And then the third thing that we need to do is, once we help people understand what good looks like, we need to help them understand how good play can have a significant impact on child-level outcomes, including the development of holistic skills, and let people make the link between all these things. And my final point around this is, not only do I think more learning through play makes good pedagogical sense and good sense for child-level outcomes, I also think now there are a number of education systems around the world that are starting to think about play as a child right. If we take, for example, the UN Convention of Human Rights, where the right to play, comes under there, and we think about, some of our more advanced systems, for example, Scotland, who are actually taking the UN Convention of Child Rights into law this August, the right to play for a child will become a child right governed by local law. And what's interesting of that, of course, is under UN legislation, a child, is dictated or is described as someone that is between 0 and 18 years old. So again, we've got this notion here at a policy level that we can take children on this whole play journey from the very, very young, through early years, through school, through college, and into hopefully positive destinations in the workplace as well.
Wow, Ollie, that was a very impressive case for play in a very short time. And you said it so clearly in terms of the research and the steps that policymakers and practitioners can can take to make sure that all students have an opportunity to be on this play journey. As you say, I'm not sure how anybody could not run off and try to institute that after this goal. I'd like to now hand over to Professor Dr. Gerhard Graus to speak to us about his thoughts on play.
Hello, my name is Gerhard Graus, and I'm really happy to be here today at the International Educational Skills Summit. In my day job, I'm the Global Director of Education for Kidzania, and for those of you who don't know, Kidzanias are large, purpose-built, two-third size cities for 4 to 14-year-olds where children can experience the world of work, including numerous job choices, as well as become financially more aware. Kidzania is an economy in that sense, of an economy of earning and saving and spending and investing and much more. The experiences range from flying planes to performing operations to being a YouTuber to cleaning windows to acting, teaching, diamond mining and much, much more. The key here is, however, that inside Kidzania, the accompanying adults are there to be seen and not heard. And that is very important in terms of the independence of the experience. Our aim is to take children from inspiration to aspiration and get them to write their own narrative of the possible. And we do this through role play and therefore role modeling. Globally, there are some 30 Kidzanias across 20 countries. There are 20 or so more in the making. And really importantly, we've engaged with some 90 million children and we hold data on those 90 million children in terms of their participation. And I'll say a little bit about that. Perhaps we will see. The key observation here needs to be that this is nothing new. Role models come into people's lives in a variety of ways. They are educators, leaders, mothers, fathers, peers, and ordinary people encountered in everyday life. In my case, they range from Robin Hood to Johan Cruyff, the football player, to my granddad, to Martin Luther King, to Christian Barnard, the first heart transplant surgeon from South Africa. And actually also, of course, as I said, my granddad. In 2021, I would probably have wanted to be Marcus Rashford as well. There are, I believe, at least 5 criteria required to elevate a person or profession to role model status in the eyes of a child. Firstly, role models demonstrate passion for what they do and have the capacity to infect others with it. They're often good at what they do. Secondly, role models show a clear set of values and live them in their world. They lead by example. Children admire people who act in ways that support their beliefs. It helps them understand how their own values are part of who they are and how they might seek fulfilling roles as adults. Role models make good things happen. A role model shows commitment to community. They are other-focused as opposed to self-focused and are usually proactive in their communities, freely giving of their time and talents to benefit people. Role models, fourthly, show selflessness and acceptance of others who are different to them. They are fair. And lastly, a role model shows the ability to overcome obstacles. Young people develop the skills and abilities of initiative when they learn to overcome obstacles. Not surprisingly, they admire people who show them that success is possible. And it's not all 5 in a package. There are bits and pieces. But what is really important is when I was a child, I didn't want to be a footballer. I wanted to be Johan Cruyff. If I were a child now, I wouldn't want to be any footballer. I would want to be Marcus Rashford. I wanted to speak like Martin Luther King. I wanted to operate like Christian Barnard, and I wanted to be as kind as my grandfather. And in a sense, this is incredibly important when you then go into Kidzania. And some of our research shows that where my colleagues, our supervisors who interact directly with the children, the best supervisors, that means their activity gets the highest quality feedback. It isn't necessarily about the aeroplane or the operating theatre. It is about what my colleagues portray as role models. My mantra has always been that children can only aspire to what they know exists. And that is incredibly important. And it's important in role modeling and in all sorts of other, and therefore role play, and therefore in all sorts of other scenarios. Briefly about our research, just to back what I've just said. We took 600,000 children globally. We looked at what their first choices were in Kidzania on their first visit, on their first school visit. We then analysed who the children were. Were they 4, were they 14, were they boys, were they girls, were they black, were they white, were they rich, were they poor, were they urban, were they rural? And we didn't do that research. We contracted that and worked with universities and other companies. Key findings: globally, there's very little difference between Mexico and Mumbai and London, for example. Secondly, almost all stereotypes are set at the age of 4. Boys are pilots, girls are cabin crew. Thirdly, and this is really important for STEM education, thirdly, there's almost no difference between the 4-year-old and the 14-year-old. So despite this investment and statements like girls outperform boys in tests, clearly there is still an issue. Incidentally, the girls outperform the boys in tests, but when they go to career choices, they then revert back to stereotype. Girls globally, regardless of their background, choose activities below the age range. It's a confidence issue, and children can only aspire to what they know exists. If you come from a socioeconomically deprived background, your menu of experiences outside is narrower than otherwise. Therefore, your choices are different. Children from deprived backgrounds will rarely choose flying an aeroplane as their first activity. Schooling versus education, we need to bring the two together, role model and role play. Every child is everyone's responsibility. We are all role models. This is not something that can be left to the teacher or the grown-up who works in early years. It is all our responsibility. And the answer to the question, how might we encourage greater learning through play? Firstly, know your children better. And secondly, trust the children as much as they trust us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's so interesting. As a researcher, I'm fascinated by your huge sample of children from all over the world and the things that you found that were similar but different depending on the children's individual background. I love thinking about adults as being seen but not heard, which is what children, of course, were supposed to be. And at one point, but then also being a role model. It's just a lovely thought. So now I'm going to turn to Dr. Swaroop Rawal to give us her thoughts as well.
Thank you very much. But before I begin, I'd just like to say, Oli, I'm so with you. At one point, I wanted to just zone out and not listen to you because you were saying everything I wanted to say. Okay, but with a little bit of difference, obviously. So I'm going to start by how and why. The thing is, children don't move, think, or speak in a straight line, and neither does imagination or creativity. But sadly, our standardized pathways of education does. Playing is learning, I think. Children learn through playing. I will just tell you a bit about myself before I continue. I am a drama teacher. I use drama in education to teach life skills. And I'm also on the governing council of Save the Children. Save the Children 100 years back persuaded the nations for child play, the child rights. So play is a fundamental right and essential part of childhood because it promotes resilience, self-confidence, cognitive skills. So I just can't resist it. I just have to read out the UNCRC article number 31, and it says, I have the right to relax and play. The state parties must recognize the right of the child to rest and leisure, to engage in play in recreational activities appropriate to the age of the child. Child rights, they're so important, and that's something we seem to neglect all the time. That's one of the reasons the child must play. Continuing, why do you think a child must play? Because it's health giving. It's well-being for the child. It promotes creativity, imagination, self-confidence, self-efficacy, physical, social, cognitive, emotional strength. Need I say more? Importantly, it's fun and enjoyment and pleasure. And I'm so angry with people who do not agree that we should have fun and pleasure. Only not the fun you were talking about or missing out on. I'm going to come back to that too. And I'm thinking, how did he read my speech or what? So yes, it plays a significant role in brain development in the early years. You know, it enables a child to learn negotiation and everything. So what are the lists? Stimulates early brain development, improves intelligence, sparks creative thinking, improves communication, vocabulary, language, promotes impulse control, emotional regulation, social competence, empathy, physical, mental health, teaches life's lesson. Wow. Do you really think we don't need play? We definitely need play. But what is play? Children's play is any behavior, activity, or process initiated and controlled and structured by the child themselves. That's why I kind of hate it when I hear, what can we do about it? You know, like what, help their learning? How do we help their learning? We should give them a chance to play. But there are so many things that we, kind of interfere in with the children, with their tuition classes and our, didactic structure of education. And I just want to go back a bit again to like what, I thought, Oli, you definitely missed out on this, but you said this in one line too, structured and unstructured play. And I'm thinking, so unstructured play, of course, is very, very important. When you just put a whole lot of stuff for them to play, structured play kind of sometimes seems to me a bit of, interfering. But You need it, it cannot just be unstructured all the time. There should be a bit of structured play and there should be a bit of unstructured play. And like Ole said, that, adults can play a great role in learning. And so that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 5 minutes that I have. I'm going to talk about the drama games that I play with my students when I teach them life skills. But I'm going to talk specifically about some incidents where I taught incredible child rights. The child right to equality. It's so difficult to explain these rights to little children and make them understand it. So I was always worried about it, and I was thinking, how am I going to explain it to them? How am I going to explain it to them? Till I came across these lovely games that we played in childhood. And there was that one game which we played when we tried to learn numbers too, is, okay, make a group of 4, make a group of 5, make a group of 6, or divide the whole group of, like, say, 40 children into 4 groups and say that now 10 of you all have 10 feet touching the ground. So there are 20 parts of you touching the ground, right? Now I want 25 parts touching the ground. So immediately, like 5 have the little kids carried the kids, and they were so easily, doing just 5 parts touching the ground. Well, all play should have reflection, especially if it has a crazy teacher like me who does drama in education. So I go, reflection, 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 and they go, thank God we have these little ones in our group. Said, now you understand why we need the little ones in society too. We need everyone in society to make a happy life. And they said, ma'am, we're never, ever going to forget this story. This game, because, through this, we actually learned that, big ones are important, but so are the small and the weak in society and in life. So you see, play can be incredibly, incredibly interesting. It can be fun, but as you said, learning. And when you're doing games like one which I did, is I'm going to take a part of your body away. So I took their hands away, I took their speech away, or their eyes away. And by the end of the hour, everybody wanted to go home. They said, this is too tough, we don't like it. So I said, I'm giving it back to you. But now when somebody takes your child right away, how do you feel? It wasn't fun for that 1 hour, believe me, Ollie, it was horrible. They were nearly in tears. Like, I can't use my hands, how am I going to have my tea? Or I can't see, how am I going to find my way? But then they realized, and they said, we're never going to forget what it feels like when somebody takes what is ours by our right, what is given to us by the power above. So play can be very interesting. I have got hundreds and millions of stories like this, but I will have to stop. I know that. But before I stop, I have one very play is powerful. Isn't this just beautiful? I mean, it kind of says it all. I just couldn't resist sharing this picture with you all. And I hope people who do not support play understand that play is powerful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I stop the share?
I hope that they will stop the share. Yeah. Okay, we'll just, I hope everybody can hear me. We will just, hopefully the screen will come back to us in a second. But that was, I have to tell you, I don't know if this panel could be considered play, but I'm definitely having fun today and I have learned so much. Dr. Rawal, I think if you stop the sharing, it'll come back. There we go. Perfect. We're good. So we have a number of questions that have come through from the attendees of this session. And
actually, sometimes these more traditional methods are appropriate some of the time. And this, for me, comes back to a wide variety of learning opportunities, and students should have an opportunity to learn in a wide variety of ways. Sometimes it might be incredible to present that back. At other times, as I was hinting at earlier, I think more play-based methodologies such as project-based learning and acting and collaborative learning, are entirely appropriate. But I guess what I'm asking for is that children should have an opportunity to participate in all of these things so that they find out what they're good at, so it's appealing to their strengths, so they can take the skills and knowledge to go on, and achieve these kind of positive destinations. Just to come back to the university question and the high stakes exam question, it is strange in my view that we tend to assess children in exactly the same way for most subjects, which would tend to be a written test, normally of several hours, to be able to demonstrate whether they are skilled in mathematics, geography, engineering, sometimes even drama, physical education, woodwork, and you've got this kind of written exam around it. And actually, if we're trying to advocate for a variety of learning methodologies in schools, then actually a useful thing to think about would be a variety of assessment methodologies as well. Mm-hmm. And I do think that in some aspects of higher education, they've kind of got this right. In some universities, if you were to do an engineering degree, for example, you would take part in simulations. Now, if we go back to my spectrum of play, simulations, are somewhere between that kind of games activity and that free play activity where students are expected to make these real life choices, in a playful way. So we do have examples of this that happen, but I guess we just need to sort of think about how we can turn that into a more kind of coherent picture, addressing the needs of the learner.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ollie. Dr. Rawal, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this since you talked about teaching complex topics and complex concepts through play already.
Yeah. So yes, I would just like to tell you and all of the listeners is that at the moment, since the last 3 years, in fact, I've been teaching in Sardar Patel University in India, and I'm teaching postgraduate students using drama. So, we play a lot of drama games. Again, like I totally am with Oli again, is that it's not this or that. I definitely would like to go in for a more blended approach where we have, especially when you go into higher education, we definitely need to, because there's a lot of, higher thinking skills and etc. that have to be learned. But you would be really surprised the amount that the students learn with play. The other thing is that long hours of study make it very difficult for anybody to study. So I, in fact, am right now teaching online lessons because, the pandemic and all that. And after half an hour or 40 minutes of, a lecture, we play games online. And it's not online games, but it's games that I've created that we can play online. And it is super fun, and I get all my students focused back into studies, and they're doing such a great job of studying well and having fun. And I would like to give you one example, because you see we have this time online where students just disappear. So one question I was asking a student that said, okay, now I need to answer, and Gloria said, Miss, and suddenly her screen's blank, and I said, oh my God, where is she gone? Suddenly, within 2 minutes, I found that girl in somebody else's computer. She said, electricity in my building went off. I ran across to my friend, and I've come into her computer to listen to you talk. And that's because they're having fun learning. So play has a huge role in that. There are so many complex subjects and topics you cannot possibly understand through lecture. You have to have experiential learning. So drama, games, play, role play, etc. are very great for that.
Yeah, those are great points. And you're absolutely right. Lecture is not going to accomplish everything and explain everything to everyone. Absolutely. Yeah. Ger, I wonder what your perspective is on this, given that at Kidzania, as you said, you have young people from the age of 4 and young at heart people to the age of 40 who come through your facilities, and you do talk about complex topics like economic topics and finances and stuff like that. So what do you think about all this?
I think there's again, concurring with what's been said by my two colleagues, but also just to kind of a number of observations. One is I think we need to just distinguish between schooling and education, and take schooling as the place that is about being taught and part of education, but they're not the same, and education is about learning. Because I think we have to be careful. We could spend a lot of energy trying to change a system that goes back to the days of the Industrial Revolution. Why do we have these systems that we have and a kind of one-size-fits-all approach? Because hundreds of years ago, whenever it was, we produced en masse people who could then go and work in factories and all sorts of places. And we just haven't moved with it. So we're either going to spend a lot of time arguing with the politicians, or we are going to be positive, aversive, and say, well, that bit we can't do anything about, but by connecting elsewhere, we can make it better. So there needs to be a connect with experiences out of school and they're being taught in school. And for me, the big word around this is plus. So I travel, or I used to travel all over the world and talk to lots of children and ask them of all sorts of ages and ask them the very simple question, why do you go to school? And far too often the answer I got and get, and because I have to is not a great motivator. But if, and I remember from my own time as a pupil in a school, I hated maths because I had no idea why I would know that A is 2 and B is 3, what is C? I'm not interested. I don't even understand the language you're talking to me. If we connect with out-of-school experiences, if we provide purpose, if we make the out-of-school experiences about learning and drawing conclusions and researching and then coming back, I think that match allows us to make it work. Good teachers will make that work, and good teachers as facilitators and as organizers and project leaders and all those things. And children and young people will enjoy it more. And you can do that across the ages, whether we're talking here about a 21-year-old, whether we're talking about a 3-year-old. In that sense, that there is no difference. I think what we are suffering from, however, and it is up to us to do something about this, is a general lack of trust. We have governments, by and large, certainly in the UK, governments don't trust teachers. And too often, adults don't trust children. One of the great things about Kidzania is coming across lots of children who've just been part of an activity that they didn't like. And what I love about that is that is their conclusion. They've had that experience, they've role-played, and they have within themselves reflected and argued whether they like it or not. It's brilliant. Where in a lesson does that opportunity exist? If we can't do it in school, we'll do it out of school, and we'll marry the two. I think it sits somewhere around there.
I mean, all of your answers are so interesting, but I think all of you kind of touched on this balance of, in school, out of school, connecting. I love how you're talking about connecting learning with the real world, because that should happen whether it's play-based learning or regular learning and regular learning. But yeah, there's another question that's come up that I think is really timely, and Dr. Rawal, you touched on this briefly in your last input, but someone asked, in what way can we follow play-based education strategies during online classes? And I know this sounds, it's been such a daunting time for teachers anyway, trying to adapt very quickly to online, putting everything that they would normally do in class online in some form or another. And how then, I work with a primary school that does a lot of outdoor learning and forest school. And how do you do that online? What can you have children do? So if anybody I'm not going to call on anyone, but if anybody wants to start that conversation, go right ahead, Dr. Rawal.
Can I? Sorry. I just have to share something with you because you said this, Christine, is that I got up one day in the lockdown in sheer depression because I, for years, have been fighting for experiential learning and no debate and no lecture. And, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? But I sat back and I thought of different type of ways I could reach out and teach my students. And I actually changed my whole format. One of the things I did was changing it from drama in education to cinema in education. But again, that's not play, but then I said, since it's not play and I want them to actively participate, not just watch, I started inventing games that we could play when we would, when our class was online. And, because now the time became less, it would be an hour long or, 1.5 hour long, you don't really need many games. But just a few games is enough to get people's brains working for them to understand difficult concepts which you cannot explain in a lecture. They have to be experienced. So I did those type of things. I did a whole new lesson in understanding emotions, where I got my students to draw and paint and do lines of moods and emotions while listening to music. So I would play the music online and I would get them to do drawings so in this way, I would think that we should not limit our definition to play is just, maybe with a ball or a stick or something like that. There are lots of things that can be used in play. And some of the things is, like claps and, all that. And that's because of my great years of being in theater and learning drama games. I've used a lot of drama games, which I've changed and made them for, online classes. So yes, it's possible. You just have to be that creative teacher.
Yeah. Garrett, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I am absolutely in awe of the teaching professions, all teaching professions, not just the teachers. At a drop of a hat, they've just gone along. Things are very different. They got quite complicated. We talk about online learning, and I'm in England, right? A significant percentage of young people don't have homes that suit home learning a great deal. There's either no internet connection or there's 4 kids on one laptop and those kind of things. And the teachers are managing that. So that's just amazing, first and foremost. Secondly, let's have just a 30-second look at what we're trying to do. What we are actually trying to do is, at the moment, we're trying to fit what was a school day into a very different set of provision. My 15-year-old is upstairs. She still has 5 lessons a day. She has PE in her room. So I think what we need to do is we need to think about how can we not do it, but how can we do this differently? So a couple of really simple examples. Don't do PE in the room. The parent who's tearing his or her hair out, get the kids to go for a walk with their mum or dad. Right? That's exercise 2, and then come back. Involve the parents. So instead of give me a summary in 20 minutes, record it, how you explain something to your parent, and send it into the year. We really need to become more creative than deliver the 5-lesson timetable online, pretending that we are still in school. And I think we need to give the teachers the license to do this. Some, inspectorates and regulatory authorities need to turn around and go, teachers, play a bit. We know that you can do this. Just play and make it happen and make it magical. And then we're back to that word trust again, of course. But we need to be in awe of the teachers, and we need to trust them to deliver this in a much better way than trying to replicate one thing into a completely different scenario. Square pegs, round holes, and all that stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And I think this issue of trust has come up a couple times, trusting the learner, trusting the child and the student, and trusting the teacher as well. There's another question that I wanted to ask specifically of Ali, but anybody else is able to chime in as well. But I happen to know that Ali might have some thoughts on this. Someone has asked, how are online games and like video game type things and online play, how does that reconcile itself with this idea of play in learning, play as a pedagogy?
Yeah, so I do have a view on that. And again, I think thinking about the spectrum is incredibly sort of useful there when we think about that. I mean, there are a number of online games which children tolerate either as part of their school day or as part of home learning, because it's a different activity and it's more engaging than what's being offered to them as part of the school. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a kind of good learning activity, around that. So again, I think thinking about these things as spectrum is a really, 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 really useful thing. I mean, there's lots of evidence for some games improving things, in particular, cognitive skills around mathematics, but these tend to be basic cognitive skills around that. My particular interests are actually more about using the domain of the computer game and using those as rich context for learning, so taking more commercially off-the-shelf as and using these as a thematic approach to link to different parts of the curriculum. And actually, if you think about that in the context of the last question, then that would be really interesting to do in this kind of period of lockdown, where you're taking a popular game, for the child, and you're building a kind of rich curriculum around that, where the child has got agency to explore video games characters or film characters or mathematical problems or different landscapes via this context. And of course, the interesting thing about the situation that we're in now is that there is an opportunity for highly personalized learning based around interest at the moment, because children tend to be isolated with their siblings, rather than coming together as these groups. The other thing that I think is incredibly powerful when we think about games and technology is the notion of children being able to kind of create their own games. So I'm a big advocate of the block-based programming language Scratch, and Scratch Junior. I think that Minecraft uses an appropriate way, and Roblox have also got value there. But there's something about children actually being able to not have screen time, as I call it, but actual kind of creativity time, where they're doing things that they're passionate about. They're learning in this kind of project-based way, normally with their peers, even if that involves kind of sharing the game around that, or sharing it with an adult, and that's highly playful in nature, as in they're moving the blocks of code to see if they can get their character to move to tell the story, and these sorts of things. So again, I think there's a kind of spectrum of practice there for all these things.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on kind of this? Thank you, Ollie, on this idea of these online games and how that kind of reconciles itself with the idea of play and learning. No, that's okay. There's a question specifically for Dr. Rawal, and then this probably will be our last question before we have to stop. And one of our viewers wants to know if you could share some of the games, and I think this could be a long conversation, so maybe one or two quick games that you invented during the pandemic, and how you maybe specifically around student emotion, and how you're able to.
So the emotion one is like I just told you about how I played music. Well, let me explain it to you in 2 minutes. Is that emotions don't have colors. So please don't understand that they have colors, but we do express some emotions through colors. Like when you see a red, you can think of warmth, anger. When you see yellow, and you see gray, you see sad, things like that. So I requested my students to keep basic colors with them, and I played music. And when I played music, and before that, I asked them to do strokes, different strokes according to music. So when there was a jarring note, it would go, and if it was a smooth, the note would go like this, and happy and, stressed would go, things like that. So then I played music, and I asked them to take colors and, use colors to express the sounds and the feelings that that bit of music invoked in them. So that was one game. I specially made it because I was finding it very difficult to do games online, and whereas I had like thousands which I played, when I was offline. So this was one of the games I played with my students, and I asked them to do. The other game I want to share with you is very nice, is I would find songs and play just the instrumental bit and ask them to identify the song. This came in the communication lesson. The thing is, we've stopped listening, and it's becoming very difficult for us to listen to other people even sometimes. We all have our own headsets and our own music and everything. So just don't listen. So this is the game I played. I made a whole loop of different songs with just the instrumental version. And I did for my students and asked them to identify the song. And they liked it so much that for 1 week, we began every class just 5 minutes listening to music and trying to identify the songs. Another thing you can do is make sounds like, keys and typewriters, and then ask people, your students, to identify those sounds. So
That's-
three games.
Yeah, those are some great ideas. And I love this idea. I'm going to have to, thank you. I'm going to have to wrap up at the moment, but there's so many things I've written down as themes that have come across in this session. And, the idea of listening and trusting, and that how the power of play for all learners of all ages, and, that everyone is a role model, and we should all consider ourselves as possible role models. And then this idea of play as a journey, not only for the learner, but for all of us as we try, policymakers and practitioners, as we try to figure out how to incorporate play in learning, and how important and valuable it is for learners of all ages. So I just think that we have our own journey to try to figure out. This doesn't have to be, as you all say, all or nothing. It's not just one or the other. There is a balance, and we don't have to transform instantly overnight. But if we all kind of take that first step on the journey and try to incorporate more play, wow, how fun. I've had so much fun this morning. So thank you all so much. Thank you to our viewers for the great questions. Thank you to Professor Dr. Gera Grouse. Thank you to Mr. Ali Bray. Thank you to Dr. Swaroop Rawal. I couldn't have done this without you, obviously. This was so fun. And thank you as well to Team India Didact for organizing the great conference that made this all possible.
Yes. Thank you very much from me to all of you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks so much. Keep safe and well.
Yes.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.